So yeah, thank you very much everyone for coming. Welcome to this online webinar. This is the first in the North Wales Tree Nursery Network working title programme. We are meeting here today to discuss the results of the scoping survey that was carried out using funds from the LEADER project and was led by Tim Peters, my colleague, who will be speaking in a moment. I'd like to begin by welcoming everyone and thanking everyone who participated in the research and responded to the survey and participated in the interview process. We hope you'll find this information interesting, and we'd like to say that this is very much sort of the inception of the idea, and we're really interested in getting feedback. If you have any thoughts, there'll be a time for questions at the end. And I'd like to thank you all for your participation in the process. I'll start off by handing over to Dafydd, who is the Managing Director of Menter Mon, who will perhaps offer a few words as to what the vision is behind the project and who we are at Menter Mon, how we're approaching things.
Okay, thanks, Luke. Can you see me? No, yeah, I'm visible and audible, I presume. So thanks, Luke. A few words from me. I won't go on for long. So Menter Mon, we're a social enterprise, and we work across sectors, and we seek to add value to resources that benefit local areas. So, you know, a local resource could be our young people, our language, our tide, our heritage, and there's an emphasis on trying to extract value from those to benefit the local area. And quite often this requires us to establish communities of interest that represent different sectors and finding a common purpose. So it's we're not going to sort out problems by just dealing with the immediate community of interest. We have to broaden our scope. So this all started about 2 years ago when I was approached by Anglesey County Council, and what it was at the time, they were obviously dealing with the Wilver planning application at the time, and they were very keen to apply a planning condition on the developments that would require them to plant native trees. But they couldn't do that because they didn't feel there was sufficient supply of native trees. And although that was in relation to Wilver, they said, you know, it was a common problem and it needed a solution. Therefore, we commissioned this piece of research to see how this could be rectified. So hopefully this piece of work and the engagement as well, because the engagement is a key part of it, will allow us to progress the project to the next stage. At the moment, there's talk about this green recovery, and obviously we are in a climate emergency, and there is a ambition to reach this net zero carbon targets by 2050, and I have no doubt that this trees will form a part of that solution. So I'm quite excited about what's going to happen here. So thank you to everybody that's contributed to this, especially to Tim and to Luke as well, and hopefully this will be at the start of a long and successful intervention. So with that, I'll hand back to Luke. Or Tim, I'm not sure.
Diolch fawr, Dafydd. Thank you very much for that introduction. I'm just replying to Leah in the chat, who's not able to get any audio. I'm going to suggest leaving the meeting and coming back in again and seeing if that resolves the issue. Okay, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Tim. Dr. Tim Peters is our consultant for this project. Many of you will have engaged with Tim over the course of this work, and he's been the driving force behind obtaining this data and producing the report. And without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Tim to present the beginning of this this presentation. Thank you very much, Tim. Take it away.
Hi, everybody. I'll just wait for the interference to stop. That's better. If you have any problems looking at the slides, seeing the slides, you can use the chat facility and just let me know. We'll try and sort something out. Everyone, does everyone see the first slide on the screen? Yeah, okay, great. All right, so unless I hear from anybody, I'm going to assume that everybody can see the first slide. Okay, so my name's Dr. Tim Peters, and I won the tender to look into this North Wales Tree Nursery Network research scoping project. And I'm just going to introduce some of the results from that. So first of all, I'd like to say thank you again to everybody who was involved in doing the interviews and the questionnaire. We couldn't have done this research without your input, and I really appreciate your time, particularly the people that met with me and that had telephone and Zoom conversations surrounding all the issues. So David's covered the background. The idea from this started off around the Wilver development. I won't cover that again because it's already been covered, but there's a picture of Wilver. So the research project that was commissioned was essentially going to determine the present demand for local provenance trees, the short and medium term demand for suitable planting stock, to analyse the species that are likely to be planted in future, to estimate the number of trees required, and to investigate the provenances which people are wanting. So North Wales, we've got some quite unique tree growing conditions in North Wales. We've got some nice pictures there demonstrating some of the challenges that we have. So North Wales growing conditions, they are very variable. We have some areas with really high rainfall, some mountainous areas, some upland areas, some lowland areas, lots of areas with coastal influence, which means the trees get salt spray. Lots of areas with high winds in the winter and with high grazing pressure, especially in the uplands. And then we have a great variability of what's called winter chilling. So that is the number of days during the winter that we get below 4 degrees centigrade. A lot of trees need to have an extended winter chilling period before they'll germinate in the spring. So for example, Newborough Forest is in the last bit of the warm water that you get coming up from the Gulf Stream, and as a result you don't really get that many frosts, whereas on the top of the mountains you get a lot. So there's a hell of a lot of variability between areas that are fairly warm and areas that are pretty cold. So local provenances, we've been talking about them throughout this project, but what do they actually mean? So the Forestry Commission several years ago divided the whole of the UK up into seed provenance zones. You can have a look on the right hand side here, the map of Wales, showing that that Wales is divided into 2 provenance zones. Provenance zone 303, which is essentially all those areas that were considered to have a coastal influence, and 304, which are more inland and less coastally influenced. So the idea of having these provenance zones was that by selecting trees from within the same zone as you were planting, you would reduce or increase the adaptation that those trees had to the local conditions. And of course, since this provenance zone map was developed, we've had an influx of various pests and diseases. So, I mean, there are other advantages to planting trees that have originated from within your provenance zone, which we'll talk about later. So what's the demand for more planting in North Wales? I thought I'd include this map. It was in the Daily Telegraph a few weeks ago, and it shows that particularly Anglesey, it's in the bottom 20 areas of the UK of forest cover. So, I mean, it's quite an odd one. I was surprised to see this. It would appear that in the UK, a lot of the areas with the most tree cover are actually the urban areas, and that a lot of the agricultural country areas are the ones that have less trees in them, which is surprising. So we've got Anglesey, only 4% cover as an average, and it's 15% across Wales. In Gwynedd, we've obviously got, and Conwy, we've obviously got issues with flooding, which are exacerbated by the lack of trees. The Welsh Government has declared a climate and biodiversity emergency and has pledged a 3% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions per annum. And we also have, the Welsh Government has also got lots of ambitious planting targets of up to 300 hectares per year over the next 20 to 30 years, although previous targets have been missed. This is just another map which shows a bit more graduation, with the most wooded counties or regions of the UK in darkest green and the least wooded in lighter. So you can see that there's a lot of trees planted in urban areas in the South Wales and in the southeast of England, and a lot of the areas that you'd think of as being agricultural are actually quite devoid of trees. So, a scoping methodology, as I've said already, the key ways of us obtaining information were through interviews with key stakeholders and experts, and also those that were involved in previous projects. I felt it was really important to talk to people who had been involved in previous incarnations of this idea to see why they felt like they hadn't worked so well, or in some cases failed. And then we had an online questionnaire on SurveyMonkey, where 45 organisations responded to the questions that I gave. There were a few technical issues. I hadn't used SurveyMonkey before. There were one or two people that reported issues with some of the options not appearing on particular browsers. So I think I fixed that in the end, but I'd just like to apologise to anybody who did have any problems. It was a bit new to me, the SurveyMonkey. And then we looked at the government tree planting targets as a way of anticipating how many trees would be demanded, and the grants, the funding for particular species, provenances and tree types. So the questionnaire results, I'm not going to bore you with all of the results, but I just want to highlight the really key points that came out from the questionnaires that were answered. So 67% of the 45 people who responded to the questionnaire stated they had struggled to find suitable trees in the past. 96% anticipated planting trees in the future. 56% had planned to plant native trees, and the other 44 a mix. So there was nobody saying that they planned to plant only non-native, which is really interesting. And all the respondents planned to plant some native trees. And when they ranked their priorities for the reasons for planting trees, biodiversity, conservation and carbon capture came out on top, and timber production was quite low down on their priorities. So I also asked people when there was stock available that they felt was unsuitable for North Wales, what reasons they thought that the planting stock was unsuitable. And what we found was that 15% said that the trees that were available were grown outside the UK, 20% outside Wales, 15% incorrect provenance. I assume that's probably outside Wales again. 15% incorrect size, and 12% not hardy enough. So the left hand of these two pictures you can see is sabre planting. So it's a new technique that's been developed in the mountainous regions with lots of sheep grazing and goats, and essentially you're planting sabre shaped trees, and they're a lot bigger when you plant them. So for that reason, 15% of the respondents said that the trees that were available were just not big enough to use for this sabre planting. So 25% of the respondents said they had their own tree nursery, and 18% reported an excess of a particular species on some years when they had a good year. 89% of the organisations were interested in becoming part of a tree cluster, and this would enable us to share expertise and certification information. So these are all the potential partners, the people who said in the questionnaire or in the interview that they would be interested in getting involved in a tree nursery cluster. So there's a real variety of different organisations across the north of Wales. So I might hand you over to Luke for these last two slides. All right, Luke.
You're muted. Thank you very much, Tim, for that beginning of the presentation. Just to talk a little bit about some of the problems that have been identified as a result of the work that we've been able to ascertain so far, is that as Tim mentioned, there's the disconnect between the suppliers of provenances or trees that are currently used in planting and the lack of availability of native Welsh provenances. And the difficulty that this will lead to is having unsuitable or non-strategic poorly adapted forests in the future if we are not planting trees that people that have got native provenances. Overall, the demand is projected to be considerably greater than the current supply. We have no large-scale nurseries in North Wales, and the supply is anticipated to be considerably large, with large-scale planting projects such as the Welsh National Forest and so forth, which are likely to have considerable demand for native trees. And therefore, we will need to increase this supply if we're going to meet these targets. In both the short and the medium and long term, there is projected to be this the shortfall, and this comes also at a time when we have an increased threat to the biosecurity of our forests from pests and diseases, novel pests and diseases coming from as a result of sort of globalization. In the last 15 years, there's been almost an exponential increase in the pests and diseases, and lots of this comes with moving trees about and importing planting stock from different parts of the world. Most recently, the case of ash dieback, the disease may or may not have arrived of its own accord in the long term, but it was certainly increased in terms of the speed in which it became endemic by importing planting stock from Europe, and this was certainly involved in speeding up the process by which the disease has now gained a real foothold. So to come together as part of the solution, we've mentioned that we have this range of partners and potential project stakeholders, and the initial idea has been forming this tree nursery network, bringing together these stakeholders, perhaps starting a new community-based tree nursery. The initial stages will involve we propose to involve a seed collection project. We have some prime native tree seed stock available in various places across North Wales, containing specimen trees that are very well adapted and have optimized genomes for seed collection. So the initial stages that we suggest is identifying and running a collection project. We then move on to the issue of forestry productive materials. One of the sort of outcomes of the survey was to discover that quite a few people are already producing trees or are growing trees in nurseries, but they haven't got forestry productive material certification. And this prevents them from being allowed to market their produce as native provenance. And if the certification were obtained or coordinated, then this would increase the availability of native provenance. So we have identified this as an area that we can perhaps be involved in, maybe running training or facilitating access to the certification. And in doing so, we can help coordinate the approach of a nursery network, and by achieve the volume necessary to produce and to meet these ambitious targets, or at least work towards it in the short term, with perhaps a larger view to the medium term. An issue that has come from, I know that people may remember similar projects to this or similar attempts to do this, and one of the reasons why it's not really taken off, that we can discover, is that we will have nurseries that will be associated with specific projects to achieve specific trees for various reasons. So a particular stretch of highways, or a particular stand of trees, or a particular business. And when this has come to an end, the project is folded and the nursery is not continued. And we propose that a more resilient approach will be to have a more strategic overview with bringing together different nurseries to produce different stock for a wider range of different projects, and in so doing have a more holistic approach to the situation. I've mentioned providing training. Forestry productive materials certification is obviously the big one, but there's also a number of other different areas which will be relevant: forest management, gazing skills, nursery skills themselves, and in so doing we will be creating employment and in various other ways improving the circular economy of the area. So these are very much sort of strategic overview of the solutions that we're proposing. This is very much the beginning of the discussion rather than our putting a sort of finessed, polished version on the table. We really welcome the feedback of everybody we've engaged with, and we're really appreciative of everybody who has contributed these insights. And I'd like to thank everybody for their participation, and I'd like to open the floor to any questions that people might